Welcome, friends. It is king cake season. Yes, we're getting close to Mardi Gras, and it's time to start making some king cake. Okay, it's a little bit more of a challenge considering the cost of things. After my trip to New Orleans, I was actually a little shocked that king cakes are $30, $35 a piece for little ones. And I decided I'm making my own again this year. I'm once again using the best of the best from Louisiana cookbook. I've had the book for a while, so I'm not 100% sure right now where I picked it up from. So this is for the dough itself, and you'll note it uses 4 eggs here, and then it uses another egg later. For the dough, it uses a stick of butter, a 2/3 cup of evaporated milk, a half a cup of sugar divided. So you're going to use 2 tablespoons with the yeast mixture, and then the rest with the milk and butter that you're melting. 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 packages of dry yeast, a 1/3 cup of warm water, of course those 4 eggs, which are ridiculously priced these days, a tablespoon of lemon, lemon rind, 2 tablespoons of orange rind, and 6 cups of flour. I use bread flour. The recipe doesn't actually specify. So here I am melting the butter and salt and a 1/3 cup of sugar in the saucepan, and I also have the yeast with the warm water and the 2 tablespoons of sugar. And once it got a little bubbly, I added those 4 eggs and proceeded to beat them. Can I just say this recipe is rather expensive these days? This used to be a pretty inexpensive thing to make. So I'm not as shocked at the prices I was seeing in Louisiana. They've always been high up here in Texas because they're shipping them from New Orleans for king cake. But I'd expected them to be cheaper there. My wife tells me that Walmart used to sell their king cakes for $4, and they also used to make them in-house. Now they're $30 and they're brought in from somewhere else. But yeah, I just beat this and then added the lemon zest and orange zest, which is about 1 orange and 1 lemon. These are the only things I was willing to buy special for this recipe, was the lemon and orange. So I do make some adjustments to the topping near the end because I don't have the pretty colored sugars, and I tried coloring them last year and it was just a mess. Anyway, I start pouring while it's mixing. I pour in the evaporated milk mixture and then start adding the pre-sifted flour. I'm doing about 1/3 cup at a time because, well, I had the 1/3 cup out already from measuring out the sugar. And eventually I realized I need my bread hook, so I will change to that in just a minute. So see here, I'm taking the whisk off and putting in the bread hook so that it can actually more easily, deal with a yeast dough here. And once again, proceed to mix my flour in slowly until I have a nice soft dough. And then, of course, I put the dough out onto a floured surface and proceed to start kneading the bread. I'm going to say kneading is a really good way of dealing with frustration and aggression and just, our current administration. I am finding I'm enjoying hand kneading bread more now than I did in the past. And it is actually more effective than just letting my KitchenAid run with the bread hook in. But I kneaded for, at least 5 minutes here until I had a nice smooth bread dough, and then that went into a greased bowl. Now, it did say use like a tablespoon of butter, but butter also has gotten ridiculously expensive these days. So I've been saving my butter wrappers, and instead of like getting out a whole nother tablespoon of butter, since this already calls for 2 sticks of butter in this recipe, I grease it with various pieces of butter wrapper that I have, and that actually seemed to be quite sufficient. So while the bread was rising, I worked on the filling, which was a half a cup of packed brown sugar and a tablespoon of cinnamon and 3/4 cup of granulated sugar, all mixed together. And I was lazy. I used the whisk in my mixer. This could have been done with a fork easily enough. And so once again, I dusted my board and I used half the dough and started rolling it out and put the other half back in that bowl for now. And I'm trying to go for a general rectangle shape. I eventually get somewhere in that area. So once I get this to roughly the shape of my board, I have melted the butter in a measuring cup in the microwave. Whole stick of butter, once again. And then I started to brush half of it onto this. And after I get all the butter on there, I use my pizza cutter to cut it into thirds. If I had been a little more careful, I could have had these even. I didn't. They were not. It was not pretty. I just wanted to make a king cake. But once I get about half of the cinnamon and sugar mixture on, I fold each one of these into thirds. And I decided I wanted to gift part of these. So I cut this one in half to make 2 half ones. I cannot make it into a circle because they're just not long enough for that. But it made 2 lovely little braids. And then I started over and rolled out the next piece. Same general thing going on here. The only difference is I don't cut these in half. I do actually make a full size piece of round king cake. Which you see, melt the butter. Roughly cut them in half. Once again, not as evenly as I probably could have if I had just, decided to take the time to do it. I'm going to say it was a rough morning. Every morning is a rough morning these days, so I just want a king cake. But I'll say it still turned out pretty enough king cake, even if I wasn't as precise as I could have been. But once again, started braiding these pieces together and then made them into a circle and moved it to a baking dish. And then the fifth egg comes into play here, where you brush the king cake top with a beaten egg. Now, the original instructions at this point have you put colored sugar over it, but I didn't want to make colored sugar, and some of the ones I'd seen in New Orleans were more of an icing based. So I decided to just go ahead and bake them after they have risen, and then do an icing later. I'll show you that. So I have some little gold and pearl sprinkles that I decided to use. So I was just going to make purple and green icing. And I used just some confectioner sugar and a little bit of vanilla, and then some of that evaporated milk that I had left over from the can. Because, well, I didn't have regular milk, and this is fine, even though it's a little yellow. It worked out really well for the green, maybe not so much for the purple, but actually made a really good icing. You'll note I have two different types of food coloring. It's what I had on hand. I didn't want to buy anything for this. Groceries are expensive enough without buying too many specialty items. It was a bit of a struggle to make the purple look like purple instead of gray. And after the first few drops, it was obviously a little bit dark, so I added more sugar and milk. And then there's my sprinkles I have. And I'm just taking this with my fork and splattering it. I'm actually pretty happy with how this turned out. I know it's not the pretty crystal sugars, but I think I like it better. And then while this was all, the icing was still moist, I sprinkled it with my gold and white pearl sprinkles. And then I did the same with the weird little short braids. And we have a pretty simple king cake that takes like 5 hours or so, mostly waiting for it to rise. So, what do you think? Is it a pretty enough king cake? As prices have risen so quickly in the last few weeks, I have done my best to kind of make do and not buy so many specialty items while still making the treats we enjoy around the house. I hope you're able to do the same. And if you're enjoying these, please like and subscribe.